Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, and otherworldly and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow Creepin' It Real Show on Twitter at creepin_it. You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. You can also go to our website, creepinitrealshow.com. Without further ado, welcome to this week's episode.
Hello, creepers. Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show. And I am one of your hosts, Miss Moni, and we have a very big show for you today. So without further ado, I'm going to roll it over to Mr. Yardley. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. A little chilly here in Atlanta, but it's the playoff weekend, so I don't think it can get better than that.
Perfect day to stay inside and watch those playoffs. And what about you, Miss Christy?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. It is freaking cold here. Yardley was being nice when he said it's a little chilly. It's in the 30s. That's a little unusual. It was in the 70s a couple of days ago. So, yeah, dug out the parka again. Otherwise, everything's going fantastic.
Nice. We have had a lot of rain here, for us anyways, and we had the biggest, most complete and beautiful rainbow I've ever seen in my life yesterday for like the whole day. It was really cool. So
Nice.
Sunny California for the win. It was still raining and sunny. So let's roll into this because we have a really big show, and I have a John Bonet update and Christy has a John Bonet update. So start with yours, girlfriend.
Okay, I just saw this a couple of days ago, and if you don't know who Jean-Benet Ramsey is, then you've clearly been living under a rock for the last 20 years. A guy in prison who was convicted of pedophilia and had been a suspect in her murder is confessed in prison. We don't know, of course, if that's legit or if he's just insane, even more insane than already. Says that Gary Olivia...
More insane than his photo suggests. He looks like a living nightmare.
He does. He looks like what you would think a pedophile looks like, which, isn't always the case. Gary Olivia, age 54, has long been a suspect in the murder of Jean-Benet Ramsey, whose body was found in her home in Boulder, Colorado in December 26, 1996. Wow, that was a long time ago. In letters to high school classmate Michael Vale, obtained by Daily Mail, Olivia claims he killed Jean-Benet by accident. I let her slip and her head bashed in half, and I watched her die. It was an accident, he wrote. Olivia is serving a 10-year sentence for possessing child pornography. When he was arrested in 2016, police discovered he had 335 photos of Jean-Benet, including photos from the 6-year-old's autopsy. Ugh. Police urged Vale has urged police to charge Olivia for Benet's death since Olivia is due for parole in 2020. Vale tells the Daily Mail that on December 26, 1996, Olivia told him, "I hurt a little girl." Investigators believe several men were involved in Jean-Benet's death, and Vale hopes Olivia will identify them. The incriminating letters have been presented to Boulder police, and murder case investigators are now looking through the new information. So we'll see.
Wow.
I'll
tell you what, this guy doesn't need to get out of prison anyway. So whether he did this or not, he doesn't need to come up for parole. So let's just go ahead and keep him behind bars. So I have an update, and I'm going to tread real carefully here because it hasn't caught on to the internet at large the way I thought it will. So there is an author named David J. Hughes who wrote a book called An Angel Betrayed. And when I say wrote a book, I'm looking at it. It looks like it might be self-published. So it's a smaller publication story. And I've done a little bit of research into it, but I'm still going to use words like alleged because 2 and 2 haven't been put together. Mm-hmm. Basically, this author, David Hughes, is well known in the Jean-Benet, the people that are still doing the message boards and the websites trying to figure out who killed her. He's apparently really well known in those circles. He has a little self-published book on Amazon, this Angel Betrayed book, and he has been arrested for allegedly having aggravated sexual assault of a child lewd conduct with a child, and promoting and recording of sexual conduct involving a child. So for some reason, with the exception of NT, the internet has not put 2 and 2 together, but there is an arrest record of a man, the same name from the same place with the same age and all the same everything. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's him, but still the conduct is alleged, but that would really kind of make sense as to why he's been obsessed with this crime in a very sick, disgusting way. So if we hear any more about that, we will certainly keep you updated. And then, Miss Christie, you have an honorable mention weird news story.
I'm kind of like a little sad. I'm pouring one out for my homie, reading this article. I've located my spirit animal, but maybe a bit too late because she's banned from Walmart. I don't know if she's arrested, but woman banned from Walmart after riding cart while drinking wine from Pringles can. So I was like, that's fantastic. What a wonderful lady. I would love to know her. Police were called to a Texas Walmart after a woman was reportedly drinking wine from a Pringles can and riding an electric cart in the parking lot. So she was in one of those scooter carts drinking wine out of a Pringles can. That is fucking fantastic.
That should be on a t-shirt.
No. Officers responded to a call around 9 a.m. about a suspicious person. Suspicious or awesome. Now, who wrote this article? Investigators found the woman at a nearby restaurant and told her she was banned from the Walmart. The caller said the woman had been riding around the store's parking lot since 6:30 a.m. drinking wine from a potato chip can.
That's amazing. How else are you supposed to spend your day if you have time to kill? And quite frankly, I've seen worse shit at Walmart for this to be the thing that gets you banned. Come on
Totally. Now. I mean, I've seen people not even wearing pants in Walmart. Now, come on. That was, so, hey, we need to find this lady. She deserves an interview, and we'll send her a couple of extra Pringles cans, because we go through those things like crazy around this house. My kids love Pringles. We should post her bail
if she needs it, too.
No shit. Freaking awesome.
So, if y'all haven't heard, Bandersnatch is the new Black Mirror Choose Your Own Adventure style on Netflix right now. And I think it was really interesting, and it's been kind of a hot topic on the internets for the last couple of weeks. Yardley, you have some information about it.
Well, yeah, we didn't really get into it last week because we talked about a lot of things. So we kind of pushed this to this week. So I guess I should ask. I think we discussed it. Both of you have watched it, but both of you did take an opportunity to check it out, right?
I have not seen it. No, not yet.
Yeah, I've seen it. Oh, how have you not seen it? I figure it's right up your alley.
I know. I have been sucked. I've been sucked into Game of Thrones, trying to get through all the seasons, and I just I am one of those people. That's why I can't read books, because once I start it, I will not put it down until it's done, and that's kind of how I am with shows too. So now I've started Game of Thrones. I am living in Westeros and King's Landing right now. My brain has not tolerated anything else since. So as soon as I can get through, or at least to a stopping point where I can like walk away from it, I'm totally checking this out, because I love me some Black Mirror.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We're recording. We're recording this on a Sunday, and tonight, True Detective season 3 is going to premiere. And before that, I think that they're going to give the actual, release date and blah 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 for Game of Thrones. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Well, seeing as Moni is the only person who had checked it out, I was kind of curious at what was the ending that you got, because I ended up getting the train ending, where if you figure out that toy is the password and Stefan needs to recover his beloved stuffed bunny from his father's safe, he then travels back to that moment in the past and places it under his childhood bed. His mother still misses her train while young Stefan looks for his toy bunny, but this time you're given more than one choice when she asks if he wants to go with her. So if you choose yes, he ends up on the train with his mother when it crashes. And the surreal twist is we see him simply pass away in the therapist's office. So essentially he's gone back and fixed the biggest moment in his life, but it also led to his death. So that's the only one that I did, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, the whole concept was pretty cool. I honestly can't remember my first ending that I got. First of all, I watched this the day that it came out, and then also we played with it a little bit, so we got a couple of different endings. But I just want to say, as far as the Black Mirror, the story was interesting. It was worth watching. It's very interesting, but this is not the best Black Mirror episode, as far as like the story and all that. But I think the concept was so cool with the whole choose your own adventure. And I think that it's something that I hope that they keep doing and maybe write an even tighter, more befitting of, the really high standards we have for Black Mirror now, and do something like this again, because I think it'd be super awesome. And maybe something more straight up horror might be kind of cool. I don't know. Like, do you shoot the monster or do you run away? And then like the different consequences. I don't know. I think this is really neat. And I think it's been kind of popular. So I hope that they keep doing stuff like this.
Well, not only has it been popular, as recently you remember the books, the Choose Your Own Adventure books back when we were young. They still have those. I think they're written by, I think they have different authors or whatever, but it's a series of books. And the person who started those books, they're actually suing Netflix.
What?
Because they're saying, they're actually suing Netflix because they're essentially saying that the Choose Your Own Adventure is something that, they kind of had a grip on.
I don't that. Come on.
Intellectual property.
Yeah, I really don't know what type of legal grounds they have to stand on for that, but it's literally a thing. It actually, the story dropped, I think, like 2 days ago. So it's fresh, and yes, that's happening. So
that's
wow, that's
I'll just chime in and say that's stupid.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because a lot of people, I mean, I remember those books. I think a lot of people remember them. And like I said, they're still in, they're still in libraries and Barnes and Nobles and things like that. But I mean, I just don't really know what type of legal grounds. And actually, I think they still sell. I mean, do people check them out a lot at the library?
I think they're really cool. They love that kind of concept. Well, because kids have so little control over their lives that they can control their own adventure in books. It's pretty fun for them. So
yeah, that's a good point.
So onward to our main story that I've been promising for weeks. The unsolved so-called mutilation murders. Sometimes they're called lipstick killings. Sometimes they've been called the werewolf murders. But basically, there were a lot, and there's actually more than the ones that we're going to kind of highlight here, of murders from the 1940s. All of white women from a specific kind of 20 was the way youngest up to age 45. Most of them are married, dark hair, and a lot of similarities between them. And I really want to give a special shout out for all the research I did do. I really actually was originally going to try to say who I thought killed the Black Dahlia. That's easy, right? I'll just solve it for the whole internet and everybody else, as I'm just going to present my case. But it got so much more complicated than that, because there were so many other murders that were almost, if not just as brutal and unsolved as that of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia. And I think that, we haven't done a lot of justice to these women to not even mention what had happened to them as well, that very well might be connected, at least some of them, because how many this kind of level of crazy serial killer or killers do you think individually were out in LA in the 1940s? Probably not one for each of these ladies. So I want to give a special shout out to the podcast Hollywood and Crime. It's on the Wondery Network. And I listened to, I believe it was 26 of their shows. And their experts on those podcasts are the only ones that put all of this together that I could find. So a lot of this was written by me. A lot of it was pulled by different sources on the internet and different books that I read. So forgive us if we're quoting you and we don't specifically cite you. Intellectual property, like I said. But we will roll forward into many beautiful young women were murdered in Los Angeles during the 1940s. Not just murdered, but often tortured, mutilated, and their bodies found dumped in public places. Most were dark-haired between the ages of 20 to 45. Often they were married, and usually they were people known to be on the LA club scene, although not all of them. So Yardley, would you like to tell us about the first one?
All right, one of the women, Layla Adele, or Dorothy Welsh. Welsh was an heiress and beautiful young woman who looked strikingly like Short. Police documents revealed that she was mistakenly named Dorothy Welsh. At that time, there was a woman named Dorothy Welsh living in the area, so this may account for the error. Welsh was murdered in her own home in 1941 while her mother and brother slept down the hall without hearing anything that alarmed them. She was killed horribly and in a manner similar to Short. 3 blows to the head with a 4.5-pound railroad hammer and a slit throat that almost decapitated her. Brown was drained from her body onto the floor. Oh, she was dragged from her body onto the floor, through the floorboards and into the basement of her mother's home. Leela's pajamas were shredded and a man's shirt, minus collar, was cuffed onto the wound in her throat. A 6-inch circular piece of flesh was cut from her right thigh and buttock after exsanguation. What is that? Exsanguation?
Exsanguation? I know, it's a hard one.
The letter G or S was written on the victim's calf in the victim's blood. The victim had not been sexually assaulted.
So I wanted to chime in here and bring that up, is that a key element of most of these cases was sexual assault and obviously sexual motivation and gratification, but not actual rape. So there's a lot of speculation that whomever performed some, if not all, of these murders was unable to actually perform sexually. Many of these women were last seen actually talking to or being picked up by men at bars in the Los Angeles or Hollywood area, and then later found physically violated and murdered, but not raped. So after the murder, the killer left a hammer at the foot of the victim's bed and stuck the knife into the ground outside the window. Police discovered the killer's bloody cotton gloves, as well as a sizable chunk of flesh that he had cut from her thigh about 100 yards from the house, but her murder was never solved. And now this next one, Miss Ora Murray. So these are all in order, and there are more, but these I think were the most strikingly similar or most famous besides Elizabeth Short. So Ora Murray, near the dawn on the morning of July 27th, 1943, the son of caretaker at the Fox Hills Golf Course, was startled by the loud barking of his dog, Pete, and Airedale. By the way, Google Airedales. They are so freaking cute.
They are.
My mom has had them her whole life. They're so cute.
They are cute.
I was like, he had an Airedale back before they were cool. So his Airedale, the Airedale belonging to one of the groundsmen, was barking, and the boy went to investigate. And when he found the dog, it was standing near a semi-nude, mutilated body of a woman, and the boy called the sheriff's department. LAPD Inspector Penpraise arrived at the murder scene, which was about 100 yards from the clubhouse, so they wanted her to be found. Penpraise told reporters that it was evident that the victim, soon identified as Mrs. Ora Murray, had been fierce in the defense of her life, despite the fact that she was recovering from 3 broken ribs. Most of her undergarments had been ripped away, and her dress was in tatters. Under Murray's body was a flattened gardenia corsage wrapped with tinsel. So you can see why there's a lot of similarities. The gardenia that was, basically left kind of as a gift or with her body and left out for people to find was pretty similar to Elizabeth Short's murder that came later on. And the press called this case the Gardenia murder.
Georgette Bauerdorf, the murder of American socialite and oil heiress, 20-year-old Georgette Elise Bauerdorf is arguably one of Los Angeles' most baffling unsolved murders. Although an abundance of evidence was left behind at the crime scene, including fingerprints, the murder was never solved. On the 12th of October, 1944, Georgette left the Hollywood Canteen at approximately 11:30 p.m. Sometime within the next 3 hours, somebody murdered her. Her body was found by the wife of the apartment house manager who entered the apartment after spotting the door lying wide open the following morning. She was met by a grim scene. In the bathtub, she found the semi-nude body of Georgette wearing just the top half of her pajamas. She was lying face down in a shallow amount of scalding hot water, which was slowly flowing from the tap. She had been raped and strangled to death. It was clear that she put up a fight. Her body was riddled with bruises and contusions. In fact, the killer had attacked with such force that fingerprints were imprinted on her body. Bruises on her head and stomach indicated that she had been beaten. Half of a washcloth was shoved in her mouth, presumably to muffle her cries, screams, or pleas.
So actually, after this murder occurred, neighbors did mention that they had heard her scream, "Stop, stop, you're killing me." Yeah, and again, keep in context also, this was the 40s, and a lot of these murders, these women had issues with their husband, domestic issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the husband is always the first suspect anyway. But the domestic issues kind of were looked upon like as look the other way. As long as nobody's complaining, it was still kind of a time where men did a little bit of what they wanted with their women. So despite the fact that this was heard, people sort of looked the other way. And here's the thing. So despite the physical evidence, Georgette Bauerdorf's killer was never found. Though she had briefly met and ran in the same social circles as Elizabeth Short, I personally, just based off my gut and the amount of research that I've done, don't think that the murders were related. She was known as Generous Georgette. She used to host military men, like give them rides or, give them a little bit of money or let them spend the night on her couch in her apartment. And there's evidence that she may have brought someone home to sleep on the couch in her apartment. And I think that possibly he decided to take more than what she was willing to give and was raping her, and that he panicked and stuck the thing down her throat after she was screaming, and which at that point accidentally killed her. So if this was related to the Black Dahlia, I think it would have been his first time, but the actual act of rape is pretty unique in these cases, and it's widely believed that whomever killed Elizabeth Short and some of these other ladies wasn't able to kind of seal the deal. So I don't think it's related, but it's mentioned a lot when we talk about the Black Dahlia.
Okay, well, let's talk about the cases of Miss Virginia Lee Griffin and Miss Lillian Johnson. On November 15th, 1944, two women's mutilated bodies were discovered at separate downtown Los Angeles hotels. The first victim was 25-year-old Miss Virgie Lee Griffin of 1934 West 70th Street. Why are they putting these people's addresses?
They used to do that back then. Isn't that crazy?
It's such a trip. Virgie's body was stuffed in a clothes closet in the Barclay Hotel at 103 4th Street. Near her remains lay a large butcher knife and a razor, the exact tools used to torture and kill Short. An examination suggested that Miss Griffith has been murdered about 8 a.m. Detective Lieutenant Harry Hansen in 1947, he would be one of the lead detectives on the Black Dahlia case. R.F. McGrary and Stuart Jones were assigned to the case. Some of the cops had to attend another scene when a woman was found dead and mutilated at a hotel just blocks away. The woman was Miss Lillian Johnson. The second victim, 38-year-old Miss Lillian Johnson of 114th West 14th Place, was discovered just after 3:30. Both women had been hacked to pieces. Lillian's breast and vagina had been dissected. Patrolman H.E. Donlin decided to check out the bars. He walked over to a bar at Hill Street, just a few doors from Lillian Johnson's body. He noticed that one of the patrons, who fit the suspect's description, was sitting with a glass of wine, and he was chatting up a woman. In the man's hand was a book of matches from the Barclay Hotel. Donlin walked over to the man, snapped a pair of handcuffs on the man's wrists. His name was Otto Stephen Wilson. At first, Wilson denied having anything to do with the murders, but eventually he collapsed and confessed. It had been a successful day for the police. He had told police that his first wife had left him because he would creep up on her when she was naked and slash at her buttocks with a razor. I mean, for real? Wow. His favorite pastime was kissing and licking the blood away while he apologized for his odd behavior. He stated that the fantasies had gotten out of control when he picked up two prostitutes. Steve Wilson was executed in the gas chamber of San Quentin Prison in September of 1945. Other so-called mutilation murders were never solved.
So important to note that while he might have been a good suspect in the Elizabeth Short case, he was dead before her murder occurred in 1947. So here we go into Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia. And if you look, I have photos posted here. You can see the resemblance that she bears and that a lot of the other ladies bear to to her. So there's a lot of similarities here. On January 9th, 1947, Short returned to her home in Los Angeles after a brief trip to San Diego with Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman whom she had been dating. She dated a lot of people, though. So Manley stated that he had dropped Short off at the Biltmore Hotel, which I actually visited a couple weeks ago, located in downtown Los Angeles, and that she was there to meet her sister, who was visiting from Boston that afternoon. By some accounts, staff at the Biltmore recall having seen Short using the lobby telephone. Shortly after, she was allegedly seen by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge, approximately a half mile from the Biltmore Hotel. So another thing that I just want to clear up here is there had long been the theory that there was a missing week, basically from the time that she was last seen walking out. And it's very poetic. Just like we last saw her use the phone in the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel, and then we saw her walk down the street and turn, and she was never seen again. But in reality, she was seen at many clubs and night and bars all over that area for the next couple of days, and with the same friends. And so it was people that knew her or knew of her who claimed to have seen her. So this whole missing week was a misconception. It sounds more like whomever did kill her only had her for about one night. So as we see the bisected body, famous picture here on our document, but her body was discovered on January 15th, 1947 in the morning. She was severed in two pieces in a vacant lot in the west side of South Norton Avenue. And actually right now that is a house and that's somebody's front lawn. But at the time it was a vacant lot. Yeah. And actually there's a lot of, man, I could go on for days with some of the stuff I've learned, but there's a lot of speculation that she was pointing in a certain area, which has led to like some suspects like George Hodel, like people who were divorced. They were like, oh, he was pointing her, you know, her vagina and everything towards his ex-wife's house. And I don't know, a lot of weird speculation in the way that but she was definitely posed. And so the killer probably was trying to say something with that, but what, we may never know. So at the time, the neighborhood was largely undeveloped, and a local resident, Betty Bersinger, discovered the body at 10 a.m. when she was walking with her 3-year-old daughter. She thought she had found a discarded store mannequin, and that was because Short was so pale, having been drained of all of her blood. But when she realized it was a corpse, she rushed to a nearby house. That took me a minute. I was like, wait, why didn't she just use her cell phone to call the police? Duh. Rushed to a nearby house and telephoned the police. Her Short, severely mutilated body was completely severed at the waist and drained entirely of blood, leaving the skin a pallid white. Medical examiners determined that she had been dead around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leading her time of death either sometime during the evening of January 14th or the early morning hours of January 15th. The body had obviously been washed by the killer. Her face had been slashed from the corners of the mouth to the ears, creating an effect known as the Glasgow smile. And therein is some of the rumors that it might have been mob-related because of the way that her face was mutilated. She had several cuts to her thighs and breasts where entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. We've seen that before in some of these killings we've talked about. The lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. The corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. Now, I think one of the reasons why Elizabeth Short's killing, besides the fact of the overkill and the mutilation and the posing, that's all very, very tantalizing, I suppose. But I think also she was such a mystery. There's so many different ways that everyone who knew her would describe her, from shy and keeping it close to the chest to, someone who mocked men and used them. And I think from what I've kind of learned about her, the truth was a little bit in between. I don't think she was a prostitute in the strictest sense of the term, as in like just go out and get a man to have sex with. I think, we all know she definitely used men to get money and dates and status and things like that. But she also used women that way. She would borrow a couple dollars from different roommates at different places she was living, or use all their makeup and borrow their clothes. But, some misconceptions just based off of her autopsy. And I had thought maybe this was a pregnancy thing. Like she got pregnant with some, important man's baby and she had to be taken out because of it, or ran afoul of the underground abortion ring that was happening in Los Angeles at the time. But based on her autopsy, she had never been pregnant. There was nothing abnormal about her genitals. That was another rumor. partially because they had been mutilated bad enough that it was hard to tell what was going on there when she was found. But also, she was known as being pretty frigid with sex. So the few men that she actually did sleep with always mentioned that she didn't seem like she was that into it. And so, 1940s, that whole male ego, they were like, well, she must be some kind of lesbian, or, well, there must be something wrong with her vagina. But none of that is true. Everything was physically, health-wise normal. And so far as we know, she wasn't into women as a rule either. So hope that clears some things up. Miss Christie, what about Jeannie French?
Yeah, Jeannie French. It was 8:15 a.m. on February 10th, 1947, a sleepy Monday morning in West Los Angeles. H.C. Shelby, that's a mouthful, a 42-year-old bulldozer operator, was on his way to a job site. One of the endless housing tracts springing up in the post-war boom. Just off Grandview Boulevard, on an isolated, weedy stretch of land nicknamed the Moors, Shelby noticed a pile of stylish women's clothing. When he went to investigate, he found the naked body of a dark-haired woman face up beneath a dew-covered red dress and blue coat with fox fur cuffs. According to a police report, her body was completely covered with bruises, blood, and mud. The face had been apparently beaten to a pulp. "Fuck you, BD," was written on the victim's torso with her own vividly hued red lipstick. Just below were the letters Tex. She had been stomped and beaten so violently that she suffered massive internal bleeding, a broken neck, and punctured heart. The victim was quickly identified as 44-year-old Jeanne French. Jeannie French? I don't know. Mm-hmm. She had once been known as one of the first flying nurses during World War II, where she gained much recognition for her contributions to the country. She dabbled in acting, only nailing small roles in her younger years, using the stage name Jeannie Axford Thomas. She married and divorced a few times, including an oil tycoon, and also had sons from these relationships. In 1945, French met serviceman Frank French, who was a veteran of 2 years. They had only been married for 2 years before the marriage began to fall apart. French, probably being resentful for the fact her new husband couldn't provide that lavish lifestyle she had been accustomed to, began drinking heavily to ease her pain. She became a mean drinker and would often take it out on her husband after she had a few drinks in her.
So Frank French, coming home from the war and the experiences that he dealt with firsthand at Pearl Harbor, had taken a toll on him mentally. And in fact, he had agreed to a 6-month trial separation and that he would admit himself to a psychiatric ward of the VA hospital just days before his wife was killed. So I wanted to mention the common nature of untreated, it wasn't even PTSD, what we know is post-traumatic stress disorder nowadays, was not a term back then. But so many, Los Angeles, that's basically what it was just a city quickly growing full of servicemen who had served in the war and were coming back with a lot of mental health issues. And also a lot of women who went from being the Mrs. Somebody, married super young, their husbands go off to war, and then they, end up doing some work and gaining some independence during wartime. And then their husbands come back kind of not the same people, and these women are still wanting to be independent. And that's what we see with a lot of these victims here, is these women who were married but were out on the LA club scene. And Jeannie French was definitely one of those. And again, she was known for being a mean drunk. She had had such an independent and interesting life prior to her marriage to Frank French, and then just started drinking really heavily, and to the point where nobody would let her kind of live with them because she was so mean and drunk all the time. And the last time she was seen alive was when she came to, I believe it was her own sister's house where her husband was staying, and she was drunk as hell, and she came over and served him with divorce papers. And then he actually went out after that. And so obviously made him a prime suspect, the fact that he had gone out in his car for a couple hours after she had left the house. But she turned up dead. And you can see that even if it was not the same killer as Elizabeth Short, clearly, fuck you, BD, Black Dahlia, would have been, this one was dubbed the red lipstick murder and was never solved. And you can definitely tell that if not done by the same person, he was definitely inspired by that killer. Mm-hmm. And again, Los Angeles was not nearly as big as it is now. There's only so many people there. Not everyone is a psycho serial killer. So
what was the text mean? TEX
Don't
text.
know.
There was nobody figured that one out. Okay.
Nobody figured that out that I can remember, but there's so many details in all of this. But yeah, and at first I thought it said PD, like police department, but if you look at it, which I have, unfortunately, that's a B. So it definitely was in reference. And this was only 3.5 weeks after Elizabeth Short was discovered. So this is either someone who couldn't control it and did it again that quickly, or and there were actually more for a while. And again, like I said, we're just highlighting a few. There was a murder on this level about once a month for the entirety of the rest of 1947 leading into 1948. But Yardley, tell us about this socialite.
Yes. Well, this was Jean Spangler, a movie actress socialite who also looked like Short. She's listed as a missing person. Technically, her body was never found, and police didn't define her as a murder victim for that reason. But what I have to ask both of you is, what the hell does technically your body not being found? Well, what is that?
Yeah, that's actually why I put this in here. So I'm glad you asked. There was a couple of other socialites, and that's why Georgette Bauerdorf gets thrown in here. Again, Jeannie French was a somewhat known actress and a well-known pilot and all those kind of things. A lot of, Elizabeth Short got around, but was no rich socialite or movie star type, although she wanted to be. Jean Spangler was a known actress and socialite who just disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And another thing that really links all of these murders is there was no robbery motive in any of it. All of their belongings were pretty much, expensive belongings. Their wedding rings, their purses were all left with them. So it was the same thing with Jean Spangler. Some weird stuff happened leading up to her disappearance, but so she definitely may have just taken herself out of the equation for other reasons. She was having financial issues, that kind of thing. But still, she had enough jewelry and belongings in her mansion to pawn, and that didn't happen, and nobody else took it. And so it's just a really weird disappearance. So there is Miss Louise Springer. This one's really messed up and makes me a little nuts. So at approximately 9:15 on the evening of June 13th, 1949, Lawrence Springer drove his new Studebaker convertible to pick up his wife. Louise Springer met him in a parking lot on Crenshaw Boulevard, where she worked as a beautician. As she entered the car, Louise noticed that she had left her glasses inside the beauty parlor. Her husband offered to get them for her. This freaks me the fuck out. And purchased a newspaper and cigarettes. So all told, he was gone up to 15. Okay, it says less than 10 minutes. I've heard up to 15, but still, short time frame that he was gone. When he returned, both his car and Louise were gone. He immediately contacted LAPD, who referred him and said that they could not take a formal complaint because she had not been missing for 24 hours. So frustrated, he returned to his Hollywood home to be with their 3-year-old son. 3 days later, his suspicions were confirmed as Louise Springer's body was found in the back seat of the car, which the suspect had parked on a quiet residential street just an hour after the abduction and murder. It was also 3 blocks away from Short's vacant lot that the body was discovered. So 3 blocks away from where the Black Dahlia was found, this woman's body was discovered. Wow. She had been sodomized with a tree limb and strangled to death. She was left in the vehicle. Detective Harry Hansen, who had been assigned to Short's case, suspected that the murders were related and thought that both could be committed by the same man, as he told the press. I think that his theory was based on the locations and the violence of the acts. Eyewitnesses were found who could only state that the man appeared to have curly black hair, which we see actually a couple times with some of these murders. The last person seen around was a dark-haired man. And he had waited in the car for approximately 1 hour before just leaving it and walking away. So one thing I wanted to mention about this case that's just batshit crazy is that, so the only reason why this even got reported as soon as it did, which was still 3 days later, was because a frustrated homeowner called and was like, this damn car has been parked on my block for 3 days. Like someone needs to come tow this car. Yeah, because she was under a tarp in the back seats and nobody had seen it. So the frustrating fact from this case is that there had been a routine traffic stop that occurred where someone was pulled over 10 feet away from this car while the killer was inside of it, and and Mrs. Springer's body was in the back seat. So neighbors had looked out because they had seen the police, and they're like, oh, what's going on? And they saw this car too at the same time. And I think it's really possible that Dahlia was related to this case, because it sounds like he was on his way to mutilating her and doing whatever kind of display that he was looking to do, except for that he got interrupted and sort of was like, okay, I just got to be cool inside this car for a few minutes, wait until the cops leave, and then just walk away whistling, which he did. Police suspected that Mrs. Springer may have known her killer prior to the murder. Louise had apparently offered no resistance, nor had she cried out, and also her manicure was pristine, as in she didn't claw to try to save her own life. So prior to the murder, a male had been calling her work 5 to 6 times per day, asking for her, and then hanging up. But this murder remains unsolved.
What's so crazy about all this is when we look at all of this stuff, and we know nowadays so easily traceable, tracing phone numbers and just forensics that we have now. It's just crazy and frustrating to think about these awful things happening, and probably most definitely would have been solved if we had if they were happening today.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if you go down the rabbit hole of the Dahlia case alone, there's so many good suspects, including George Hodel, who I had mentioned, who I went to his house in Los Feliz a few weeks ago. But, he's a really good suspect, and you can watch on YouTube Steve Hodel, his son, putting together his case that his father killed the Black Dahlia and other women. I don't know if I entirely believe that, but certainly there's a lot of evidence that, at least in Dahlia's case, the person had some medical training, because of the bisection was done quite surgically and quite beautifully, and also the composure that someone would have had to be like, okay, I'm about to cut this person clean in half, and what's going to fall out of a human body when you do that? Sorry to be gross, but and the way that it was
it's a little
clean,
messy.
There's a lot of real, just like, I'm cool with all this because I've done this before, kind of involved in hers. And George Hodel was a physician, among many other things. But what was my point with that? It's just, there's just a lot of stuff. There were so many suspects, though, in all of these cases, because these women were connected to so many. Okay, they were married and that was not going well, but also they were seeing a man, or just one time. There was this little lady named Jean Springer, who was 4'11" and running around mean drunk, and then she gets into a car after a fight with her husband, gets into a car on a dark street and is never seen again, and is mutilated and dumped just like this. Like, there was a lot of this going around, and I just don't think it could have been one guy. Oh, that's what I wanted to mention. Kind of like, do you guys remember how Ted Bundy was handsome and charismatic and used to do the whole, oh, I have a broken arm or leg, and can you help me to my car? And then there's a thought that this man maybe came back from the war like so many others and had some kind of injury, and so was able to kind of be handsome and charming and charismatic to meet these women, and maybe even have some kind of injury that was, that you could see, or maybe just had a bad back or something from being injured, and was like, oh, I'm so harmless, can you just give me a ride, or would you like to go out for a drink, or ever what else, and then would attack and kill these women. But still, there was a lot of when the bodies were, there was a lot of dragging involved. There was a lot of idea that it was difficult for the killer to, and someone who was as strong as he was, to strangle the way that he did, to the point where people were almost decapitated, or these things, still struggled walking to be able to get these bodies where he wanted to get them. And that also plays into the whole theory that this person was impotent. So a lot of theories, a lot of weird things out there. Choose your own adventure. Haha, don't sue us. Going down the rabbit hole here.
It's funny that you mentioned.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, Yardley.
Well, I was saying it was funny that you mentioned Ted movie, because y'all hear about James Hetfield from Metallica is going to be playing Officer Bob Hayward in the Ted Bundy movie that's going to premiere at Sundance this year.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow. So that's anyway, since you mentioned it, it just popped in my head. But as far as questions about the Black Dahlia and all these murders, I agree with you. It has to be a lot of different people. And it is sad that without the technology and the resources that we have, that a lot of things do go unsolved. And just think about the thousands and thousands of cases like this that people have to deal with and look into. So I think that I mean, because when you look at the descriptions of some of the things that happen to these people, it's just insane that you could ever get to a point where you could do that to a body, you know. So I think that it's sad, but it's definitely interesting stuff that I feel like a lot of these cases, even though I think that we went a little bit past the one that gets the most notoriety, which is Black Dahlia. I do think that people trying to put things together regarding these cases will go on for years to come. You know, so I do think that the memory of at least some of these women are definitely going to go on for a while. And I think sad that the other women that we talked about don't get talked about enough. But definitely some interesting stuff. I'm happy you brought this topic up. But how many Black Dahlia movies have ever been put out? Didn't they have one? Wasn't there like one or two? Or was it more?
There was that one with Josh Hartnett, and I think it was Mia somebody. Let me just IMDb it real quick. And that's what I meant to mention. Steve Hodel, when he wrote the book originally saying that his father was the killer, had asked for the evidence to be brought out of the evidence locker, and that was in 2013. And sometime between 2013 and 2016, there was DNA evidence, and he had DNA matching his father, so they would have been able to possibly solve or at least exclude his dad as the killer. But that evidence, and police can't keep, people are naive thinking how big an evidence locker or whatever can be. However, it is very strange that once the renewed interest started coming into, hey, let's test this DNA against this other and possibly solve this, that evidence disappeared and nobody knows what happened to it. So there's a lot of weird shit in Dahlia's case that, a lot of that was at the time when mass police corruption was a huge issue, when the reporters were allowed to have as much, if not more, access sometimes to details of crimes and access to suspects, and be first on the murder scene and walk around the murder scene and screw it up. There was a lot of that going on. So there's a really colorful kind of background to all of this. But the Black Dahlia movie, that's not very good, came out in 2006, stars Josh Hartnett and Scarlett Johansson. But I think, let me look at who was, oh yeah, here we go. Mia Kirshner was Elizabeth Short. That's not who I thought that was. But yeah, that movie, I'd have to rewatch it, but it was pretty slow.
I looked it up after you announced this is what we were going to do, and I was going to watch it, but the reviews were so bad. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to put myself through this. But I can see, like, some of these cases that we talked about, I had never heard of them, but a couple of them, I could totally see it being the same killer as the Black Dahlias. And then the others, it's kind of like, I could see those being somebody else, but they also could be connected to each other. So it's like almost like there's 2 or 3 different people that were crazy at the time on like murder sprees, but a few of them definitely seem like they were the same MO as Black Dahlia, and so I could totally see those being connected to each other.
Yeah, and there was another woman, and I don't have her name off the top of my head. She actually survived. So 2 men picked her up in their car and hit her over the head, stripped her clothes off, and then ended up kicking her out literally a couple blocks from where the Black Dahlia was found in a vacant lot. And she was found with a cracked skull and everything else. She ended up surviving. But I really think 2 men and the way that they botched it and all those kind of things, I think people were also trying to copy this with varying degrees of what we might call success. I don't know if it's successful. They didn't kill someone, so I'm glad they didn't. But there's just a lot of weird shit going on in LA at the time because, quite frankly, also because these people weren't getting caught. So it was like they had so many people confessing to all of these murders and saying, I did this, and people believing they did because they passed like lie detector tests, but then they would find an alibi that was like, there's no way way they could have. Like
Mm-hmm.
this whole story just gets crazier and more twisted, and that's why it kind of took me so long to untangle some of it and put it together in a cohesive format that we could actually read for our show today. But my goodness.
I know that you had said that there was a podcast you were listening to about it. Have they made any kind of theories as to for who they thought? Do they think it's the guy that was on YouTube, or has anybody really claimed any kind of here's what I think happened? Or
they do a couple of recap episodes with an FBI profiler and a woman who is a true crime writer, and knowing the backgrounds and knowing both of them, the true crime writer has written full books and interviewed a lot of people involved. And so they just kind of more put together like a profile of what they think the killer would have been like.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of, and I kind of agree with the FBI profiler, where he was saying probably impotent, possibly injured, probably a war vet, those kind of things. They do present some of the more known suspects in the case, and some of them they outright kind of exclude based on certain things, and others, they like Hodel, they say are interesting suspects, but still they're not convinced that they've solved this whole mystery, because again, there were so many people involved with all these women that it's hard. Even just Elizabeth Short, there were so many people involved with her because she didn't keep up-to-date records of who she was talking to this hour and then 2 hours later. And also a page from her little black book was torn out. It was found with her body, but it was torn out. So that was kind of interesting. Somebody actually had written in claiming to have been her killer, and they think that it was. He was saying that he was going crazy and was going to turn himself into police. Of course he didn't, but bodies kept falling every month. So really crazy, interesting stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, it's good. Good stuff. Great selection today, Moni. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I am so in Game of Thrones mode. Every time you say Hodel, I hear Hodor. I'm like, Hodor? Hodor is in the 40s?
It's something else. I put it in the show notes. This year for 2019, I wanted to do a segment called They Damn Sure Better or They Fucking Better Not for theatrical and streaming original horror movies that we're going to watch this year. So essentially, after we agree and before we watch any particular movie, we'll give one thing we feel the movie damn sure better do, and one thing we feel the movie fucking better not do. And then we'll see if we're pleased with our thoughts afterwards when we discuss it on the show. And I was meaning to say that during the weird news segment, but I thought that would kind of be fun to do this year, especially with It and all of those movies coming out. I'm definitely willing to go there, so I wanted to put that out there. They better
not fucking let Chastain ruin the whole thing as Yardley's.
Yeah. You know what? That'll be an easy one, but I figure that we can apply this to movies that we watch in streaming or anything that we all agree to, because sometimes you want to kind of get it off your chest. What the hell it is that you don't want to happen, especially with something that you're putting your money into. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
That would be great.
Very nice. I'm very excited to have finished this section of the show because I've lived in this world for weeks, and it's probably time to get my head out of mutilated bodies and unsolved murders for a little bit for my mental health. So, Christy, talk to us about what we can look forward to next week.
So now you get to dive into plane crashes. Yay! Woo-hoo! Aren't you excited? So last month was the 30th anniversary of the Lockerbie bombing, the crash. The plane was bombed over the town of Lockerbie, Scotland. I was reading, I was young when this happened. 1988, I pretty much had my head up my ass and was, a self-absorbed little shit. You are when you're kids, you don't read the news or anything like that. I do remember a little bit of this, on the news when I was a kid, but I didn't really know kind of the backstory of the aftermath of what happened in Lockerbie, the townspeople, just how they had to come together, and basically their whole town was ransacked, looking for clues of what happened. A man found a woman or a college girl's body on his shrub, laying there, on his shrub in his garden. It's just, to me, is a little, I have a fear of flying. It won't keep me off of an airplane, but I do freak the fuck out when I'm in an airplane. I'm afraid of heights, and so being 40,000 feet in the air freaks me the fuck out. So this is my worst nightmare. One of my worst nightmares, like spiders and soggy cereal. I can't imagine what this town went through. And it is an unsolved case. They do believe they know. And I did watch a documentary of the brother of one of the victims, to this day is trying to find peace and have, and do, he's been doing his own investigations. And it was a pretty interesting series, and I'll probably put the link to it if you guys are interested in watching it. If not, it'll be kind of a quick, just little rundown of what happened, and then more about the aftermath of Lockerbie and how they responded and what happened to their town, and some of the testimonies of what they saw. And it's horrifying. And I can't imagine that you ever get over something like that. So I wanted to do something a little bit different, and it really just I was obsessed with it for that week in December when it happened. I think it was like it was the 21st of December. And so I was reading this on my way to Chicago because we left for Chicago and I had an 11-hour drive. And so part of that was reading those weird stories from Reddit that we talked about last week. And then the other half was reading all the anniversary stories. And I just thought it would be something interesting to go over because we were all younger, and most people that listened to this were younger and didn't quite get the details that maybe if you were older, that, really paying attention. So, and there's a lot more stuff now because of the internet. So we can kind of run down who the suspects are. And I think the biggest, of course, is Iran. And then there's a guy that was just released. Maybe it was, anyway, we'll get into it. But anyway, it's an interesting story, and I thought it'd be something we would be good to go over.
Nice. I know little, if anything, about this, so I'm excited to learn more along with maybe our listeners. I do want to just say real quick, I thought of you. So my birthday was 2 days ago.
That's
and
right.
My kid woke me up. What's that?
That's right. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my kid woke me up, my oldest, and she's like, I made you breakfast. And I was like running around, like getting everybody ready for school and work and whatever else. And so I was just like, yeah, I'll grab it in a minute. And I finally see what she's done. So it's been a good 15 minutes, and this is going to give Christy the cold sweats. She had poured cereal for herself, her sister, and for me. And she had literally used a half gallon of milk and 3/4 of the rest of the box of cereal. And just left it. And her sister wasn't even awake yet. So she was just like, I've got breakfast ready for all of us. And I'm like, well, the baby's not going to be able to eat right now. She's, in bed. So I didn't have the heart to throw it out in front of her because she was so proud and excited. So I had to put the cereal with the milk in it already into the refrigerator.
I am literally gagging right now.
And so I was like, oh, Christy would be dead.
I would die.
And then had to wait till she went to school to throw out the cereal. But definitely thought of you because I was like, oh, I ate mine and I was like, so good. And
God.
it was totally like, yeah, it was all mushy. But she was so happy. I was like, I'm just going to eat this. Yum, so good. Okay.
Oh, man. So I would have been dumping it in a plant. Each spoonful going into the plant. Yummy.
I was like, maybe next time we just put the milk later. And
yeah.
She's like, okay.
All right.
That was that. And let's do the socials. Christy, where can we find you on social media?
If you want to check me out on Twitter, I don't do a lot on Twitter. I mean, I post things and I share things. I don't do a lot of personal stuff on there as far as what I'm up to or whatever jokes or things. That's more of my Instagram. I'm Creepin' It Christy on Instagram, and then Creepin_It on Twitter. That's the official Creepin' It Real Show account. So come find us, give us follows.
Mr. Yardley, what about you?
Yep, you can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker.
Nice. I'm laughing because someone had given us a shout out for having a great show, and he gave it to Yardley and to the Creepin' It Real show, basically Christy. And I went on there and I responded, thanks. And I meant thanks, because thank you for thinking it's a great show. But I was like, I'm 1/3 of this too, guys.
Yeah. Big ups to Black Ron Pod. Yeah.
That's who that was? Yes, thank you.
Well, that's the guy's
no.
name, and he actually had. He's apparently, I think he's a new user to Twitter. So,
cool.
we're
And he's
one of the
following me
first
now.
people
So thank you, sir. I was teasing, so I was just like, I'm part of this.
Yeah, that's what's up, Black Ron Pod.
Yeah, I'm Rebel Moni on Twitter, and I'm actually on there a lot now, so you can go there and actually find content. Have a lot of fun over there. And then I am Moni Bear on Instagram, so come and find and enjoy. It's mostly stuff about my kids, spoilers, so maybe boring. Stuff about comics and about kids, that's about it.
Hey, also, if you're listening to this podcast through iTunes, if you could just give us a rating. I mean, I know that they're not always going to be 5 stars, but we would love to get more ratings and reviews. If you want to leave a review, great. If not, you can just give us a rating, and it takes 2 seconds, and we'd really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, and Patreon. So
yes, I have been very bad on Patreon.
Yeah, I've been still doing my weekly updates. I went to Hotel Del Coronado in San Diego yesterday for the purpose of this show because it is reported to be haunted. So I will be posting about that very soon. Chris and I will get back on the horse with our drunk horror stories. We'll read some of this weird Reddit shit after that. But
yeah, we'll get one of those done this week.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So other than that, if there's not anything else from you guys, then wish adieu to our fine listeners, and thank you so much.
Creep it real, y'all.
Creep it real.
Everybody's raving about the real Frenchy two-step. Everybody wants to do this most fancy new step. It's a funny bear, carrot on a tear. Well, I do declare it is classy. Gabby brought the dance and it's got us all a-going. Since she came, no other 12 has had any showing. It's a music treat for your dancing feet. It is flashy but neat. Just a twist and a bend that you hope will not end. Oh, that Gabby glide. It's just a real Parisian fly. Prance along as though you were upon the boulevard.